It was 6:47 p.m. at 30,000 feet when the first-class cabin turned into a battleground of bias. Seated comfortably in 2A, Marcus Chen Williams, 17, fresh-faced but composed, was blindsided by Sarah Mitchell's sharp command. "Move to economy." Her voice sliced through the hush of leather seats. Phones emerged like fireflies as passengers captured the moment she branded his valid boarding pass fraudulent. In an instant, the smooth pre-flight routine fractured into a live spectacle of racial profiling, every live stream ping amplifying the injustice. This isn't just another passenger dispute, it's a raw expose on prejudice at altitude. Tell us what you think in the comments below. If you haven't already hit subscribe and ring the bell, part 1 of this 9-part saga starts now. Marcus stood perfectly still as Sarah Mitchell's words echoed around him. The cabin lights meant to soothe seemed harsh in that moment, reflecting off the polished overhead bins and the wide-eyed passengers who gawked at him. He lifted his boarding pass, seat 2A, Boeing 737, paid in full 3 weeks ago, and held it high backlit by the cabin reading light. His platinum American Express Centurion card glinted as he pulled it from his wallet, a silent testament to his status. Yet Sarah's lips curled in a dismissive smile as she examined nothing but the ink and paper, her gaze flicking between the ticket and his young face. "Sir, you must return to your assigned seat in economy," she declared, voice laced with a certainty that bordered on cruelty. Around them, the gentle murmur of pre-flight chatter vanished, replaced by a low hum of tension. A passenger in 1B tapped his phone screen, broadcasting every second. Another whispered into an adjacent tablet, "This is discrimination," at 6:47 p.m. on Flight 447. Marcus inhaled slowly, steadying himself. His designer backpack sat on the floor, the logo discreet but unmistakable. He cleared his throat, voice calm yet firm. "Ma'am, that boarding pass is mine. I purchased this seat." He placed the pass and his loyalty card on the tray table side by side like evidence on a crime scene desk. Sarah's eyes narrowed. "Most people know their place," she snapped, stepping back as if burned. Her colleagues. Tom Jenkins, the gate supervisor, and Officer Martinez from airport security hovered at the doorway, summoned by her earlier call. Tom's uniform was immaculate, his tie perfectly straight, but his impatience showed in the faint crease on his brow. "Son, if you don't step off this plane, I'll have to insist," he said, voice low, but unwavering. Every passenger now had a front row seat. A hush fell, broken only by the soft whir of the air system. Marcus raised his chin. He spoke not to Sarah, not to Tom, but to every person watching, every viewer on Emma Rodriguez's Instagram Live. "I'm doing exactly what any ticketed first-class passenger would." He tapped his boarding pass. "Seat 2A. Paid for 3 weeks ago. Platinum status." His gaze swept the cabin, making direct contact with half a dozen phones pointing his way. A ripple of murmurs ran through the cabin. The woman in 3C nudged her husband. "Look at that watch," she murmured, pointing at his wrist, a Cartier that caught the overhead light. "He must be someone important." But Sarah, fixated on her assumption, did not stagger. She crossed her arms. "Anyone can have expensive things," she retorted. "This isn't about wealth, it's about policy." Behind her, Officer Martinez exchanged a glance with his partner. He stepped forward, badge gleaming. "Sir, may I see your ID?" he asked civilly. Marcus handed over his driver's license without pause. Martinez inspected the photo, then the embossing, then looked back at Marcus. "Name matches. Seat matches. Everything checks out." He offered the license back. "You have every right to be here." Sarah stiffened. "I don't care if you're cleared. You're creating a disturbance." "Creating a disturbance," Marcus echoed. "I'm seated quietly. You're the one refusing to do your job." He lifted his phone and tapped record. "For the record, 6:49 p.m., Flight 447 to Denver. I'm being denied my paid first-class seat despite valid documents." The cabin seemed to lean in. Every camera lens widened, every user on social media counted another viewer. Tom Jenkins hesitated. He tapped his watch. "We're about to enter our slot time. Any further delay could cost the airline thousands." Marcus nodded, respectful. "Then perhaps a call to someone who can resolve this." He tapped his contacts. Sarah bristled. "Fine, make your call once you're on the ground." But the captain's voice crackled through the intercom. Flight attendants, prepare for departure. It was the ultimatum to move or be left behind. He exhaled and dialed. 8 rings. Sarah's lip curled in triumph. Go ahead, make it quick. On the 9th ring, the line clicked. Hello? A deep, measured voice answered. Marcus, Dad. Marcus replied, voice steady. I'm on Meridian 447. They're claiming my seat is fraudulent. The title President and CEO on his caller ID was visible to anyone who peeked over his shoulder. Sarah's confident smirk faltered. Stand by. I'm on my way, came the reply. Marcus clicked speaker. Flight attendant, this is David Chen Williams, CEO of Meridian Airlines. I'm calling about my son's seat. The cabin went deathly silent. Phones trembled in mid-record. Even Sarah's posture slackened as her mistake dawned on her. Sir, she began, but her words dissolved. Marcus ended the call. When Dad lands in Denver, he'll want a full report, and so will the thousands watching right now. He pocketed his phone. You've heard him. This aircraft is not leaving until this is fixed. Tom Jenkins opened his mouth to reply, then closed it. Officer Martinez stepped aside. The cabin filled with a collective breath in those few seconds power had shifted. As Sarah glanced at the rows of phones trained on her, her hands trembled. Phones pinged with new viewer notifications, 5,000, then 6,000. Emma's live feed exploded. Marcus smiled faintly, eyes steady. Thank you for the lesson in customer service, he murmured. Then he buckled his seatbelt and leaned back, watching the drama he had just orchestrated unfold like a masterclass in quiet authority. Seconds stretched into lifetimes as Marcus Chen Williams stood firm in 2A. The cabin lights hummed quietly, the air conditioning whispered. All around him, first-class passengers shifted uneasily in their seats, eyes darting between the teenager and the flight attendants. Phones recorded every second. Sarah Mitchell clipboard clutched tight, treated Marcus's boarding pass as though it were contraband. With a swift motion that betrayed her nerves, she snatched it from his hand. Her manicure-tipped fingers brushed the printed name and seat number as if in touching it, she could unmask a fraud. Sir, she pressed voice icy, I need you to move back to economy immediately. Marcus met her gaze without flinching. He raised an eyebrow and tapped his tablet where his digital boarding pass shimmered on screen. Miss Mitchell, you're holding my valid ticket, seat 2A, purchased 3 weeks ago, platinum status. He let the words hang in the air. Tom Jenkins, the gate supervisor called moments earlier, appeared at the cabin door, palms pressed against the frame. His tie was pristine, but tension creased his forehead. Son, he said, voice low but firm. You can't just refuse. This isn't a refusal, Mr. Jenkins, Marcus replied quietly. It's a confirmation. You're refusing to acknowledge my right to this seat. He produced his driver's license and American Express Centurion card, both shining under the cabin lights. Here's additional ID. He placed them on the tray in front of Sarah side by side like exhibits. Sarah recoiled as if stung. Kids these days think they can scam their way into first class, she muttered, then raised her voice. Security! Her command was met with a collective intake of breath. The flight attendants exchanged glances. Tension crackled between them like static. Before the situation could escalate further, Marcus flicked his wrist and opened his phone's camera app. He hit record. For the record, he announced voice clear enough for every phone in the cabin to capture this is 6:50 p.m. Flight 447. I have valid documents. I am being singled out and denied my paid first-class seat. A ripple of approval circled the cabin. Phones rose in unison. The passenger in 3B whispered into her phone, viewers up to 2,300. Tom took a step forward, hands raised in a placating gesture. Sir, please put that away. You're only making this worse. I'm documenting my own removal, Marcus replied gently. If you want to make this go away, you'll seat me where I paid to sit. Sarah's knuckles whitened around his boarding pass. I don't care if you're a millionaire. That doesn't change our policy. Policy, Marcus echoed. He set his phone down briefly and retrieved a printed copy of the airline's seating policy from his briefcase, part of his meticulously organized file. He tapped the page that read all valid boarding passes properly. Verified guarantee seating is purchased. It clearly states here that once I've checked in and passed security, I am entitled to my seat. Tom read over her shoulder. He swallowed. Let me see that. Sarah handed it over with a snarl. Tom's eyes flicked between the policy and Marcus's composed face. The cabin held its breath. Miss Mitchell, he said carefully, returning the paper to her, you have the policy here. Validate his documents and seat him. Sarah's mouth worked for a moment. Then with a final glance at Marcus's unwavering gaze, she exhaled. Fine, she spat. Go back to your seat. A cheer, suppressed but palpable, rippled through the cabin. Marcus returned his boarding pass to his wallet, sliding the Centurion card back in as well. But Tom's authority wavered. He cleared his throat. Everyone, please remain seated. We're preparing for departure. The cabin lights dimmed slightly as passengers complied. The overhead bins clicked shut. Marcus settled into 2A, buckled his seatbelt, and leaned back, eyes fixed on the aisle. A hush fell, broken only by the soft whir of engines. Emma Rodriguez ended her Instagram Live for a moment and switched to Twitter, posting a screenshot, discrimination at 30,000 feet, sky first bias, she typed. Instantly retweeted 20 times. Marcus tapped his phone. A notification flashed. Board meeting moved to 6:15 p.m. Urgent. He smiled faintly, his father's world already shifting in real time. Sarah returned to her station, hands shaking as she straightened her crisp uniform. Jessica Morrison, another attendant, offered a sympathetic glance. You okay? Her eyes mouthed silently. Sarah nodded, but could not meet her colleague's gaze. She returned to her station, wiping imaginary dust from her uniform. Tom Jenkins stood at the cabin door, listening to the final pre-departure announcement crackle through the speakers. He rubbed his temples. The slot window for departure loomed closer. Ground control's patience waned. Marcus unlocked his phone again and filmed Tom. For my records, he said softly, this is gate supervisor Tom Jenkins, refusing to seat me despite valid verification. Jenkins raised an eyebrow, caught again. He cleared his throat and stepped away. The cabin returned to its mechanical hum, overhead bins, settling seatbelts clicking. Yet the undercurrent of tension persisted. Phones continued to record messages, pinged viewer counts climbed 3,100, then 3,500. Marcus pulled out his tablet and began writing notes, timestamps, names, statements. Every second documented, every injustice cataloged. The crescendo built as the captain's voice announced, Ladies and gentlemen, we apologize for the delay. Please remain seated with your seatbelts fastened while the crew completes final checks. He glanced out the window. Ground crew waved green. The engines roared to life. Marcus closed his eyes for a moment, exhaling. Then with quiet precision, he set his tablet aside and picked up his boarding pass once more, this time with gratitude. As the plane taxied toward the runway, the cabin lights brightened. Phones lowered, but the record had been made. In that silent standoff, power had shifted from the flight crew back to the passenger, from prejudice back to policy, from assumption back to dignity. And somewhere on the ground, a CEO readied himself to intervene. The cabin's air was thick with tension and recycled oxygen, as if the 737 itself were holding its breath. Marcus Chen Williams remained perfectly still in 2A, letting the low hum of the engines and the distant buzz of phones provide a stark backdrop to the showdown unfolding around him. The flight attendant, stiff with misplaced authority, hovered at the aisle's edge, Sarah Mitchell clutching a handful of boarding passes. Brad Thompson, with arms crossed, and gate supervisor Tom Jenkins hovered behind them, his tie-crooked gaze darting between the live-streaming passengers and the young man who dared to challenge them. From the seatback pocket in front of him, Marcus retrieved his phone. The lock screen displayed a photograph of him and his father, David Chen Williams' arms draped over each other's shoulders and suits pressed to perfection. He swiped to the home screen and spotted the new message, its preview, blinking like a warning light, Dad landing in 20 minutes. Be ready, 20 minutes. Enough time for liftoff. Enough time for security to march him off the plane. Enough time for the airline's algorithm to suppress the hashtag that was racing around the globe had Meridian discrimination into oblivion. But Marcus knew how these things worked. Once a story took fire on social media, no amount of corporate spin could douse it. Already, Emma Rodriguez's Instagram Live had exploded past 2,500 viewers, and Twitter was aflame with outraged retweets, news clips, and calls for a boycott. He slid his phone into his jacket pocket, letting out a small, controlled breath. A part of him wanted to check that message again to know precisely when his father would touch down to savor the moment of authority that would follow. But another part recognized the value of suspense, the quiet before the storm. Beside him, the passenger in 1C, a middle-aged businessman in a navy suit, leaned forward. "Son, you handled that beautifully," he murmured, voice low. Marcus offered a curt nod, acknowledging the rare show of solidarity. The man tapped his own phone, capturing audio of the hushed applause that had rippled through first class. Across the aisle, Dr. James Park in 1A straightened his tie. If they'd checked your ID and boarding pass properly the first time, he said, without rancor, none of this would have happened. Sarah Mitchell's lips pressed into a thin line. Her hands trembled as she attempted to smooth her uniform. Brad Thompson cleared his throat, blinking rapidly, as if surprised by his own involvement in the ordeal. Tom Jenkins stepped forward, clearing his throat. He forced a measured tone. "Ladies and gentlemen, we apologize for the delay. Our crew is finalizing pre-flight preparations. We'll taxi shortly." A ripple of frustrated murmurs followed. Eyebrows rose in unison at the mention of delay. Phones flickered with live feeds, ready to capture every twist. Marcus leaned back, reconnecting his seatbelt. The leather strap clicked into place, echoing in the sudden hush. He crossed one ankle over the other, folding his hands in his lap. On the overhead display, the projected departure time flickered 6:57 p.m., just 3 minutes before his father would even land. Jessica Morrison. Another flight attendant, summoned from economy class, drifted down the aisle, clutching a service cart. She paused near Marcus's seat, pushing it forward by a few inches, then halted. "Sir," she said softly, gaze not meeting his. "The boarding pass is verified. You may remain." Marcus appreciated the apology implicit in her words. "Thank you," he replied quietly. "I appreciate it." Behind her, Brad Thompson cleared his throat, stepping into the aisle. Cabin crew secure carts and prepare for takeoff. His voice had returned to its practiced neutrality, as if nothing had happened. Tom Jenkins glanced at his watch. His second hand ticked forward. "Prepare for taxi," he ordered, as if invoking the final authority of the flight deck. The flight attendants moved into choreography carts, locked into place seats, positioned upright, tray tables stowed. The cabin began its ritualistic transition from idle chatter to anticipatory silence. Overhead bins clicked shut. Marcus watched the overhead indicator switch from boarding to taxi. The wheels would turn before long, and as they did, time would slip away unless someone intervened. He reached for his phone once more, lifting it just enough to see the countdown timer he'd set 20 minutes ago. But before his thumb could tap the screen, a shadow flickered past the cockpit door. The corners of Sarah Mitchell's eyes widened. The captain's voice crackled over the PA. "Flight attendants, just a heads up, we have a brief unscheduled hold due to gate traffic. Stand by for further instructions." Gate traffic, a thin veil of corporate speak for "we're waiting for orders." Minutes passed in a stretch of silence that made every chime and whisper feel magnified. Marcus closed his eyes for a moment, remembering his father's calm guidance, "Never raise your voice. Speak truth with quiet confidence. Let authority come from content, not volume." He opened his eyes, slid his phone back into his pocket, and exhaled. Then the cabin door whooshed open behind Tom Jenkins. Two uniformed security officers, TSA veteran Officer Martinez and his partner, Officer Johnson, stepped into the aisle, badges glinting. Their sudden appearance stiffened the atmosphere. Tom Jenkins sputtered. We have everything under control." But his voice trailed off as Martinez fixed Marcus with a steady gaze. "Sir, we've been asked to verify a passenger seating issue," Officer Martinez announced. His tone was neutral, professional, but in his eyes shone curiosity. He held out his hand. Marcus slid his boarding pass from his wallet, handing it to Martinez. The officer examined it with a practiced eye, then checked the name against his own tablet. Marcus Chen Williams. Martinez read aloud. "Seat 2A, first class." He checked the ID. "Matches." He looked at the Centurion card in Marcus's other hand, then up at him. "Everything checks out." Sarah Mitchell, already pale, stepped forward. "Officer, we had concerns about ticket fraud." Martinez held up a hand. I'm not here to mediate policy. I verified documents. These documents are valid. You can see them for yourselves. He tapped the pass the ID, then handed them back. Tom Jenkins swallowed. Behind him, the cabin lights brightened as the attendants released their final checks. The wings of the aircraft glittered in the fading sunlight outside the windows. Officer Johnson leaned in. Anything else we can help with? He gave Marcus a respectful nod. Marcus offered a slight smile. Thank you, officers. That's all. He took back his documents and slid the wallet shut. Martinez turned to Sarah Mitchell. Ma'am, next time, please verify before assuming. Have a good flight. He and Johnson turned and left, sliding out the cabin door. As the door hissed shut, the cabin's collective exhale was audible. Phones lowered some anyway. Emma Rodriguez's live stream panned up to show the closed door, then returned to Marcus's impassive face. Her overlay showed 4500 watching live. Sarah Mitchell's shoulders slumped. Jessica Morrison offered her a silent, tentative nod of sympathy. Tom Jenkins fiddled with his clipboard, unable to find anything to write. The captain's voice crackled again. Ladies and gentlemen, we apologize for the delay. We're cleared to taxi now. Flight 447 to Denver will be departing momentarily. Please remain seated. The cabin lights dimmed as reading lights flicked off. Marcus leaned back, closing his eyes for a moment. He could almost hear his father's low voice. Let them see you, not your anger. Keep your composure until authority speaks through action. He opened his eyes and tapped his phone once more, though he didn't need to read the message again to know its urgency. The final chime echoed in his mind. Data arrival 6 minutes. The runway lights blinked ahead. The engines idled, ready to surge. The stage was set for the next act when the call would connect, power would shift, and the flight crew would learn that authority isn't worn on a uniform, it's carried in a name. And 5 minutes before takeoff, the entire plane would be grounded. The cabin lights seemed to dim just a fraction when the 2 TSA officers appeared, their uniforms crisp against the soft tan of the first-class interior. Officer Martinez, a veteran of countless airport incidents, carried himself with measured authority, every step deliberate, every gesture controlled. His partner, Officer Johnson, trailed just behind, eyes flicking over the passengers who still held their breath. Sarah Mitchell's confident posture unraveled the moment she caught sight of them. She had expected Tom Jenkins's backstop, perhaps a stern word from a gate manager, but not federal officers whose sole duty was safety and verification, not petty seat squabbles. Officer, please, she began, voice tight. We have a passenger. Martinez raised a gloved hand, cutting her off. Let's see the documents. He said, his tone neutral enough to sound courteous, but firm enough that no one dared interrupt. He had learned long ago that authority came not from volume, but from presence, and his presence filled the cabin like a tide rolling in. Marcus stood maintaining perfect composure. He retrieved his boarding pass from his wallet and handed it to Martinez, who held it up under the flickering overhead light. The hologram shimmered as the officer tilted it, red, blue, green, and Martinez's brow furrowed in concentration. He flipped it over to inspect the back, then passed it to Johnson, whose tablet glowed as he scanned the barcode and cross-checked it with the flight manifest. Sarah and Brad Thompson leaned in, straining to catch every reaction. Phones popped out even in the dimmed light as Emma Rodriguez's live stream hovered at 3,000 viewers and counting. The cabin's ambient noise had drained away, replaced by the soft hum of the aircraft's systems and the whispered gasps of seated passengers. After a tense beat that seemed to stretch into minutes, Martinez lowered the boarding pass and held out his palm. ID, he said. Sarah's attempts to speak again died on her lips. She glanced helplessly at Tom Jenkins, whose expression was somewhere between consternation and apology. Marcus complied without a word, producing his driver's license, maroon and gold university seal at the top gravamen of security features in each corner, and sliding it across. Martinez took it, lining it up, with Marcus's photo checking the finer details, the microprint, the UV security ink, the embossed seal. Then he looked up at Marcus and nodded. Matches, he said, handing it to Johnson for a final cross-check. Johnson tapped the tablet twice, then flipped his head toward Martinez. All clear, he announced quietly. No signs of tampering. Ticket ID and associated credentials are genuine. A collective shudder ran through the cabin. The 2 officers, having done their duty, didn't swagger off. Instead, Martinez turned to the gathered flight attendants and gate supervisor, gaze calm but unyielding. "You're authorized. He has every right to be here." He swept his arm in a gesture both inclusive and dismissive. This matter was closed. Sarah Mitchell's eyes darted from Martinez to Johnson to the cabin where dozens of phones now pointed at her. Her carefully applied makeup looked smeared, her uniform rumpled. Shamed, she tried to speak, but her voice was caught. Brad Thompson cleared his throat, attempting to restore order. "Passengers," he said, voice barely louder than a whisper, "we can proceed." But the damage had been done. Emma Rodriguez's voice rose in her live stream. "Discrimination concerns everyone," she intoned, echoing Dr. Park's earlier intervention. "When we let assumptions override verification, we fail our community." Her viewers cheered in the comment feed. Dr. James Park cleared his throat, adjusting his blazer as if preparing to give a sermon. "I've spent my life saving lives in emergency rooms," he said softly, but with unmistakable gravitas. "And yet I cannot save a young man from being judged before proof. This is not just a policy failure, it's a moral failure." The cabin's hush deepened. Phones lowered as passengers absorbed his words. Even those who hadn't witnessed the earlier confrontation now understood its gravity, not just a seat dispute, but a momentary lapse of humanity at 30,000 feet. Tom Jenkins, standing near the galley door, swallowed. He opened his mouth, closed it, then took a breath. "I apologize, sir," he said to Marcus. His voice cracked under the weight of the moment. "I should have verified the documents sooner." Marcus inclined his head. No triumph in his posture, only a tempered dignity that magnified the apology. Sarah Mitchell stepped forward, tears in her eyes. "I'm sorry," she said haltingly, voice catching. "I'm deeply sorry for doubting you." She looked to Martinez and Jenkins. I had no right." She swallowed again as if trying to summon strength. "I treated you badly." A gentle murmur of support rose from the cabin. A businessman in 1C who had recorded the entire exchange reached out to replay Emma's live stream on the overhead monitors, making sure every passenger saw the broader context. A flight attendant, a supervisor, even a gate manager confronted with the consequences of their bias in real time. The overhead monitors flickered, cycling through the live feed Emma's commentary snippets of Twitter, trending #Meridian discrimination. The raw footage of Sarah grabbing Marcus's pass until the cabin screens were awash in the white-hot glare of accountability. Marcus took a step forward, lifting his voice just enough to carry. "Thank you, Officers Martinez and Johnson," he said, nodding at them. "Thank you for verifying, and thank you, Dr. Park, for speaking up." His gaze swept over the flight crew. "I respect that mistakes happen. What matters is how we correct them." He paused, letting his words resonate. "I hope this reminder echoes beyond today. That at every touchpoint, security gate cabin verification and dignity must go hand in hand." The cabin erupted in applause. It was tentative at first, then grew louder, hand-slapping seatbacks, phones raised in tribute, murmurs of "well said" and "amen" washing through the rows. In the aisle, Sarah Mitchell's uniform shimmered under overhead lights, tears tracing clear lines down her cheeks. Brad Thompson rubbed his forehead, eyes closed, as if willing himself to unsee the moment. Tom Jenkins' clipboard fell from his hands, pages scattering at his feet, and he bent to pick them up, head bowed. Officer Martinez offered a small, respectful nod before turning away to help Johnson exit the cabin. Their presence had not only resolved the immediate conflict, but had reminded everyone that authority rooted in integrity carried far greater weight than any badge or title. With the TSA officers gone, the cabin's final checks resumed. Flight attendants buckled their own harnesses, stowed service carts, and tapped the intercom. Cabin crew prepare for departure. The whir of the auxiliary power unit shifted, readying the engines for the surge onto the runway. Marcus returned to his seat, reclaiming 2A with quiet purpose. Phones still recorded, but now many were pointing to Sarah, who wiped her tears and straightened her posture. Even she would carry this lesson forward, memories captured in high definition etched into her conscience. The departure board outside the window signaled taxi, and the Boeing's engines growled to life. First class buckled in, the cabin settled. But beneath the routine drone, something had changed. Moments ago, discrimination had breathed in this cabin, but now accountability had exhaled a clearer, braver air. As the plane began its taxi toward the runway, Marcus leaned back with serene confidence. The final minutes before takeoff stretched out not as a countdown to liftoff, but as a testament to what happens when justice interrupts prejudice in real time. In a matter of minutes, one phone call would ground this plane entirely and deliver a quiet reckoning that would ripple far beyond these seats. And when the CEO's authority spoke up 5 minutes later, only then would the true power of dignity and verification be fully realized. The jetway doors swung open onto the polished terminal floor, and for a moment time itself seemed to pause. Marcus Wellington stood framed by the plane's exit, like a hero stepping onto an epic stage. Behind him, Flight 447's first-class cabin sat tense and hushed, the hum of its engines muted by the thrumming excitement of every passenger and crew member who watched him now. Above the terminal monitors, departure clearance for Flight 447 blinked red delayed. The cabin crew exchanged worried glances, their uniforms suddenly ill-fitting, their poise gone missing. Marcus slid his leather briefcase from his shoulder and set it on the floor with the soft click of precision-engineered clasps. He unlatched the case and retrieved a stack of business cards printed on thick ivory stock. In that moment, the young man who had stood accused of fraud, challenged for his right to occupy a seat he had paid for, transformed into the embodiment of authority. With a single deliberate gesture, he offered the topmost card to the nearest flight attendant, Sarah Mitchell, her face still pale from the confrontation mere minutes before. She reached out with trembling fingers and took the card. Eyes scanning the embossed gold lettering, Marcus Wellington, Chief Executive Officer, Wellington Group. A collective intake of breath rippled through first class. Behind Sarah, Brad Thompson's jaw hung slack. Next to him, Gate Supervisor Tom Jenkins sagged forward, clutching his clipboard as though it were a lifeline. The cabin's earlier tension, born of arrogance and bias, collapsed into stunned silence. Passengers who had drawn their phones from pockets now lowered them, no longer needing to record this, was a moment to witness, not to stream. Emma Rodriguez's Instagram Live still captured the scene, but even her rapid-fire commentary quieted her viewers' count, frozen as though the algorithm itself paused in awe. Marcus replaced the pen atop his briefcase and met Sarah's eyes steadily. "I hope you understand now why this seat is mine," he said, voice calm but carrying an unmistakable authority. "Wellington Group owns a controlling stake in Meridian Airlines, nearly 50%. You've just embarrassed yourselves in front of your CEO's son." Though he sounded almost gentle, the words struck with the force of steel. Sarah's lips parted, then closed again without sound. She clutched the card as if it were a shield against the humiliation she felt. Behind her, Brad Thompson looked as though he might collapse, heat flushing his cheeks as he realized the depth of his error. A murmur broke from the gathered passengers, a low wave of astonishment that quickly grew into hushed applause. Dr. James Park, still seated in 1A after defending Marcus earlier, nodded in respect. "Well played," he murmured. "Well played indeed." His voice carried across the cabin just enough to be heard by those nearest him, adding a final exclamation to the tableau. From the cockpit, the distinct click of the intercom key echoed. "Meridian 447, you are cleared for departure when ready." But the pilot's voice was hesitant, as though even he felt the weight of what had just transpired. The engine's hum deepened, ready to surge forward, yet the plane remained firmly rooted to the taxiway. Marcus reached into his jacket pocket once more, retrieving his phone. He tapped a quick note to his executive assistant, "Cancel conference room reservation, we'll handle this in person." Then he pocketed the device. The message was brief but unequivocal. He intended to resolve this here and now, not behind the safety of boardroom walls. Sarah Mitchell swallowed and looked to Tom Jenkins, who blinked as though awakening from a nightmare. He cleared his throat, stepping forward. "Sir Mr. Wellington," he said, voice quaking, "please accept our deepest apologies. We will make this right." Marcus inclined his head slightly, accepting the apology, but revealing no triumph in his expression, only the steady calm of someone who had anticipated every moment. "Thank you," he replied. "Let's start with this. I will remain in seat 2A for the duration of this flight. You will ensure my comfort and safety as you would any Platinum Elite passenger. Then upon landing, I will call a meeting with your senior leadership. There are systemic issues here that need addressing." Behind Tom, Sarah exhaled, her shoulders dropping from their rigid height. She offered a shaky nod. "Yes, sir." "Absolutely." Passengers exchanged relieved smiles. A mother in row 3 whispered to her child, "See, always stand up for yourself." A businessman in row 4A raised his coffee cup in a muted salute. The cabin's energy shifted from charged conflict to collective vindication. Marcus closed his briefcase and slung it back over his shoulder. "Thank you," he said again, this time, including everyone in his gaze, staff and passengers alike. "Now let's get this bird in the air." The pilot's voice returned firmer this time. Cabin crew prepare for departure procedures. The flight attendants moved with renewed purpose, stowing service carts and checking harnesses. Sarah Mitchell paused outside Marcus's door and placed a hand lightly on its frame. "Mr. Wellington," she said softly. "Thank you for—" Marcus offered a reassuring half-smile. "Just doing what's right," he said. She nodded, stepping aside. The cabin doors closed with a gentle hiss. Passengers stowed their electronics and fastened seatbelts as the safety demonstration resumed, but the usual practice cheer was tempered by the air of something far more consequential. The engines roared to life, and the runway lights beckoned. As the plane accelerated down the tarmac, Marcus leaned back in his seat, tapping his finger against the window's cool surface. Outside the terminal's jetways slipped away, and the city lights blurred into streaks under the rushing wings. He closed his eyes for a moment, feeling the familiar thrill of takeoff, but this time it was mingled with something deeper. A sense of triumph, yes, but also of responsibility. He had turned a moment of discrimination into a demonstration of accountability. By revealing his identity, he had forced the airline to confront its own biases and vulnerabilities. As the wheels lifted from the runway and the cabin ascended into the evening sky, Marcus opened his laptop and reviewed the draft of his Wellington Protocol, the comprehensive reform plan he would present to Meridian's board the moment they landed. It included real-time bias reporting, mandatory diversity training, passenger feedback integration systems designed to prevent future injustices like the one he had faced. He glanced around the cabin at the diverse faces settling into their journeys, families on vacation, business travelers poring over emails, students returning home. Behind them, stories waited to unfold. But as they flew, the silent promise was clear. No passenger would ever again face the humiliation of being doubted simply because of their appearance. The seatbelt sign clicked off, and a hush fell over first class. Sarah Mitchell moved down the aisle, offering refreshments with a respectful nod. Brad Thompson followed carefully, attentive, a new humility in his stride. Tom Jenkins checked the overhead bins, his clipboard hanging forgotten at his side. And as the flight climbed into the night, the most powerful statement was not Marcus's business card. It was the collective commitment that followed a pledge that dignity and respect would soar alongside every passenger in every cabin on every flight. The airport shuttle rattled Marcus Wellington along the tarmac into the private executive terminal, but his mind was still riding the adrenaline surge of first-class vindication. Less than 10 minutes earlier, he had stood in the jetway business card in hand, exposing the depth of the crew's error. Now escorted by Meridian Airlines' most senior executives, he entered the gleaming glass conference room at precisely 7:03 p.m., long before the rest of the board had even filed through the foyer. The room itself felt charged, as though it had scented trouble in the air. Floor-to-ceiling windows framed the runway lights like a panoramic stage, and a circular mahogany table dominated the space surrounded by high-backed leather chairs. A massive video wall flickered to life the moment Marcus stepped in, instantly looping footage of Sarah Mitchell's initial confrontation. Tom Jenkins' uneasy assertions in the live stream that soared past 8,000 angry viewers. The audio feed repeated the flight attendant's accusation. "This ticket is fraudulent," and the moment Marcus produced his Centurion card and apology-torn boarding pass. It was a looped montage of institutional arrogance laid bare. Board members took their seats in near silence. Chairman Robert Sterling, whose silver hair and measured demeanor usually brought calm to stormy meetings, sat at the head of the table. To his right was Jennifer Walsh, General Counsel, her expression a tight knot of professional concern. On his left, Michael Torres, VP of Customer Relations, tapped a stylus against his tablet. Reservations about Marcus's boldness flickered in their eyes, but all recognized the imperative of what was to come. Marcus set down his briefcase and opened it with practiced precision. He withdrew a slim stack of printed slides and laid them neatly before him. Without preamble, he looked up and spoke in a voice that carried both the authority of a CEO and the measured calm of someone who had just weathered an unforgivable injustice. Thank you all for convening on such short notice, he began. I know you've just touched down, as have I. But the events on Flight 447 demand immediate, decisive action. He tapped a button on his laptop, and the video wall shifted to a bar graph. Discrimination complaints Q3 versus Q2. The numbers spiked alarmingly. Meridian's discrimination complaints increased by 47% quarter over quarter, far above industry norms, he said. In dollar terms, we're facing nearly $2.3 million in settlement costs annually, and that's before today's incident. The room absorbed the data in silence. Sterling's eyes narrowed, taking in the implications. Marcus clicked again, and a second slide appeared: FAA anti-discrimination statutes, with a bullet-free, text-free display of regulatory excerpts. Under 14 CFR 382.7, discrimination based on race, color, national origin, or religion is expressly prohibited in air transportation. Each violation can carry fines up to $37,377. Federal lawsuits and Department of Transportation investigations have already begun. He didn't need to mention the pending calls from CNN and the Wall Street Journal. Everyone knew. Now Marcus continued, lowering his voice, so the weight of the next words landed like a gavel. This is not about punishment for its own sake. It's about systemic reform. To restore trust, I propose the following, effective immediately. He advanced the slides in real time, but the bolded headings were spoken rather than written. First, immediate termination of the 2 employees responsible for the discriminatory actions on Flight 447. He let the statement hang. Sterile quiet filled the room. Sarah Mitchell and Tom Jenkins, seated at the rear, exchanged uneasy glances. Sarah's eyes brimmed with tears. Jenkins looked as though he might vanish into the polished floor. Jennifer Walsh's pen froze in midair, her jaw set. Marcus pressed on without apology. Second, mandatory bias recognition training for every customer-facing employee, 40 hours minimum within the next 6 weeks. Third, deployment of a real-time discrimination reporting system accessible to passengers and staff. Any complaint triggers an immediate investigation. As he spoke, the executives around the table scribbled notes, their own expressions shifting from shock to dawning agreement. The air buzzed with the electricity of shared resolve. Finally, Marcus said, pausing for effect, "We will issue a public apology from Meridian Airlines leadership acknowledging our failures and committing to transparent monthly reports on complaint volumes and resolution times." He leaned forward, hands steepled. These measures are not optional. They are the price of regaining our integrity and ensuring no other passenger suffers the humiliation Marcus Chen Williams endured this evening. His use of his own name, even in the third person, crystallized the moment. Sterling closed his eyes for a beat, weighing the moral gravity and the business imperative. Then he opened them and rose from his chair. The scritch of his leather slip-ons on the floor cut through the tension. On behalf of Meridian Airlines, he said, voice steady and measured, "I move that we adopt all of these measures as presented, effective immediately." A chorus of ayes followed. Jennifer Walsh and Michael Torres signed approval sheets without hesitation. Even those who had arrived skeptical, Marketing Director Priya Nair, Finance. Chief Derek Lowe nodded in agreement, recognizing the inescapable logic of Marcus's demands. Sarah Mitchell's shoulders slumped in relief and shame. Tom Jenkins sank lower in his seat, resigned to his fate. Marcus watched solemnly, acknowledging their regret, but offering no personal vindication. His eyes instead shifted to the entire board. "Thank you," he said. "Your unanimous support sends a clear message. Discrimination has no place in this company." He closed his briefcase and gathered his materials as the board members began discussing implementation timelines. The hushed urgency in their voices spoke of immediate action. Scheduling training sessions, drafting apology, language, fast-tracking the development of the reporting portal. In a matter of minutes, a crisis had been transformed into a catalyst for enduring change. Amid the flurry of post-vote logistics, Sterling approached Marcus and offered a firm handshake. "Well done," he said. "You've guided us through a difficult moment and turned it into a turning point. Meridian thanks you." Marcus nodded in appreciation. "It's only the beginning," he replied. "Our true test will be in follow-through." With that, he rose and exited the boardroom, leaving the executives to the work of reform. Outside the glass walls, jet bridges gleamed under the nightlights, and passengers disembarked from Flight 447, unaware of the transformation unfolding just beyond the terminal's gates. They would soon feel the difference, an airline reborn committed to dignity in every cabin, every flight, everywhere. Tonight, Marcus Wellington had not only reclaimed his rightful seat, he had reclaimed his airline's conscience, steering it toward a future where respect was non-negotiable and inclusivity the true measure of success. By dawn, Terminal 4 had been reborn. The polished marble floors reflected a cascade of new signage, zero tolerance for discrimination banners above every kiosk, dignity standards posters flanking each gate, digital displays cycling through employee pledges to respect every passenger, every time. Where just hours ago phones had captured an injustice unfolding in real time, now bespoke kiosks invited travelers to scan QR codes and review Meridian's newly launched equity charter. Even the tannoy announcements carried a different tone, measured inclusive, insistent on courtesy. Ground staff who had once turned away Marcus Wellington now wore lanyards that read, "I pledge no assumptions." TSA agents manning the security lanes distributed pocket cards outlining travelers' rights, while customer service booths teamed with staff ready to guide any passenger who felt they'd been wronged. The transformation felt less like a hasty PR stunt and more like the overnight opening of a civic center devoted to respect. Maria Santos, Meridian's newly appointed Director of Equity Initiatives, strode through the concourse, clipboard in hand. Her first stop was the Central Information Desk, where she oversaw the activation of the Integrity Hotline, a real-time reporting system that hours earlier had existed only in Marcus's boardroom presentation. Now the hotline number scrolled across overhead monitors and stations equipped with discrete kiosks, allowed any one passenger, flight attendant, baggage handler to lodge a complaint or commend exemplary service within seconds. Passengers trickled in, blinking in the fluorescent glare of change. A family from Denver paused to photograph their smiling toddler holding a Dignity Standards flyer. Business travelers tapped their phones to access the newly live Meridian Trust app, which tracked discrimination complaints and resolutions with dashboards that flashed green, yellow, or red status lights. Even the coffee shops had joined the initiative with baristas sporting pins that proclaimed, "Everyone deserves a first-class experience." In the gate area, reporters mingled with travelers, their smartphones trained like searchlights on any sign of yesterday's turmoil. On Camera Channel 7's Mia Rodriguez held up a leaflet and declared, "I'm here at Terminal 4, where just 12 hours ago a high-profile discrimination incident tore through this concourse. Today, Meridian Airlines has turned that scandal into a blueprint for dignity. Let's take a look." Her live segment cut to footage of employees in training rooms, dozens seated in front of screens looping clips from Flight 447. The next shot showed them paired in role-play exercises, practicing neutral language and respectful tone. Viewers saw grizzled mechanics and security officers equally engaged alongside flight attendants, all texting responses into tablets that fed into the central compliance hub. Meanwhile, financial markets were already digesting the turnaround. The company's ticker emitter had dipped by 2.4% in post-market trading the previous evening, but by opening bell, it rebounded sharply. Analysts on Bloomberg panels praised the swift, sweeping reforms as a masterclass in crisis-to-opportunity transformation. Investment newsletters included bullet points like proactive accountability bolsters, brand equity, and dignity protocol, likely to drive loyalty among underrepresented travelers. At 9:30 a.m., Marina Caldwell, Meridian's chief financial officer, logged into a video conference with the board. Behind her, a live feed of the Community Equity Dashboard displayed a cascade of green indicators. Bias training enrollment at 78% completion. First-day reporting volumes down 90% from last quarter's peak, and passenger satisfaction ratings up by 12 points on social media sentiment analysis. Our early metrics suggest not only a rapid cultural shift, but a tangible financial upside, she reported. Brand trust is rising, and we're seeing increased bookings on routes previously lagging in diverse markets. Back on the concourse, passengers began sharing their experiences on social media. @GlobalNomad tweeted, "Just flew through #Meridian Dignity Terminal walls of respect reminders at every turn." Bravo travel blogger @Skyward Says posted zero tolerance signs plus real hotline. Meridian just leveled up. Next time I'll fly them first. In cafes, screens showed aggregated tweets and Instagram stories, plotting out a map of terminals and gates converted into equity zones areas where free Dignity snack stations offered treats alongside pamphlets on bystander intervention. Not everyone was entirely thrilled. A handful of staff grumbled that the overnight overhaul felt theatrical, that real change required more than posters. But those voices were drowned out by the wave of authentic gratitude. A delivery driver handed a free equity coffee by a smiling barista joked into his camera. Even the Dunkin' down the terminal is on notice, serve everyone with respect or be replaced. Laughter rippled through the station, a testament to the levity that genuine reform can foster. By midday, the Meridian Dignity hashtag had vaulted into worldwide trending lists. Industry trade publications ran features headlined, Meridian's Equity Revolution, the new standard in air travel, complete with infographics illustrating how the airline's quick pivot had inspired copycat programs from parking garages to airport lounges nationwide. The Transportation Equality Summit scheduled for next month even announced a new Meridian Protocol breakout track, dedicating 2 hours to unraveling the airline's approach to real-time crisis-driven policy change. At Gate 47, the very gate where Flight 447 had first erupted, Marcus Wellington made an unannounced appearance. He was welcomed by cheers from staff and curious applause from travelers. Wearing a simple navy sweater instead of his CEO power suit, he greeted employees one by one, thanking them for embracing the changes and encouraging them to keep the momentum. No grand speech, only quiet nods of appreciation and a promise. Today we proved we can change overnight. Tomorrow we make sure it lasts. As he moved on the first-class cabin and the entire terminal felt reframed, where assumptions once lurked in the glare of leather seats now stood a network of accountability nodes, each designed to catch bias before it could fester, where humiliation had reigned apology and improvement took root, and where power had once been wielded by uniformed authority, it was now balanced by the empowered watchfulness of every passenger with a smartphone. Under the watchful gaze of new digital dashboards, Terminal 4 pulsed with activity that no longer felt routine. It was a living demonstration of how fast and far one company could travel when it combined moral clarity with decisive leadership. And though the hours ahead would test the staying power of these reforms in that moment, the moment when prejudice had been sidelined by policy, the aviation world witnessed something extraordinary. The birth of a terminal reborn, a corporate culture reset in 48 hours flat, and a public testament that dignity once demanded can catalyze an entire industry's transformation. By first light, the story that ignited at 30,000 feet had ignited every major newsroom on the planet. Dawn in Tokyo broke under the banner CEO overthrows cabin. Racism splashed across the Asahi Shimbun's front page. In London, the Times ran the headline, How a Teen Stand Forced an Airline to Rewrite Its Playbook. While in New York, the Financial Times proclaimed Meridian's moment, how a CEO's son grounded injustice. Across continents, competitors scrambled to adopt the newly christened Wellington Protocol, drawing hurried memos to air their own bias audit plans. In Washington, a bipartisan group of senators convened an emergency hearing in the chamber's ornate hearing room. Your testimony is requested, read the letter to David Chen Williams, chairman of Wellington Group. By mid-morning, he took the witness chair before the Senate Commerce Committee, flanked by live feeds of Emma Rodriguez's viral live stream. Microphones captured every subtle uptick of his measured baritone as he recounted the Flight 447 incident, outlining Meridian Airlines' rapid policy reforms and urging Congress to codify dignity in transit standards. His final words echoed in the vaulted room. When an institution moves at the speed of responsibility, it protects not just its brand, but its basic humanity. Back in Chicago, regulators at the Department of Transportation began drafting new anti-bias regulations. Federal civil rights attorneys pored over footage of first-class humiliation. Industry insiders whispered that within weeks, airlines would be required to publish quarterly discrimination metrics, establish real-time reporting hotlines, and implement third-party audits direct heirs of Meridian's overnight overhaul. The DOT's sleek offices hummed as analysts crunched projections greater transparency could reduce legal exposure by millions while boosting consumer confidence across American carriers. Meanwhile, in Sydney, Qantas executives watched the saga unfold with rapt attention. A hastily scheduled meeting saw their CEO surrounded by digital dashboards projecting social media trends. "We cannot afford to lag," she declared, ordering bias training modules within 48 hours. In Paris, Air France sent an urgent memo to every terminal: prepare for policy updates. Even low-cost carriers felt the tremors they quietly integrated. Quick response incident teams and public apology templates into their crisis protocols, hoping to stay ahead of the coming wave of scrutiny. On the trading floors of Wall Street, airline stocks danced to the tune of accountability. Analysts upgraded Meridian to buy, citing the brand value uplift from its decisive action. Competitor tickers: LUVAAL, DAL. Each dropped slightly on fears of increased compliance costs. Yet by midday, reports surfaced that several carriers had quietly greenlit their own equity charters, driving a modest rally as investors wagered on the long-term returns of socially responsible carriers. In the travel blogger community, the hashtag #DignityInTransit turned into a rallying cry. TikTok creators reposted Emma's footage alongside clips of airlines unveiling their own equity champions programs. Instagram influencers posted side-by-side stories before and after photos of terminals' employees sporting Dignity Pledge badges. The relentless real-time documentation made clear that this was more than performative solidarity. It was a seismic shift in passenger expectations. Across the Atlantic, in a soaring glass-walled conference room at Heathrow, IATA, officials convened a special session. Charts displayed the 78% drop in discrimination complaints at Meridian. Guest speakers included Sarah Mitchell, now a senior trainer sharing her journey from bias to advocate. Airlines representing every region signed a non-binding resolution to evolve or exit the global air travel ecosystem if they failed to uphold dignity standards. Those were the exact words: evolve or exit. By late afternoon in Buenos Aires, public forums erupted around the new regulations. Passenger advocacy groups held open mic town halls at Retiro Bus Terminal, demanding similar protocols for long-haul coaches and regional rail networks. The ripple that began with a teenager's boarding pass had become a continental conversation on the right to respectful service. In Mumbai, a banking software startup unveiled an app modeled on Meridian's real-time reporting system. It promised justice on the go for city transit lines and ride-hail services. The product launch live-streamed to thousands of developers, each eager to adapt the template to sectors from hospitality to healthcare. The civic technology community marveled a single airline incident had inspired cross-industry reinvention. In a small auditorium at the annual Consumer Justice Summit in Johannesburg, attendees rose to their feet as a highlight reel played. It showed the moment Marcus Wellington lifted his business card, the stunned faces of Sarah Mitchell and Tom Jenkins, the emergency boardroom's unanimous vote, and the overnight transformation of Terminal 4. Applause thundered, tears glistened, and speakers testified to the power of strategic grace. Under that roof, delegates resolved to take the Wellington template back to their own countries with preset policy drafts, training curricula, and compliance checklists. As dusk fell in Los Angeles, executive teams gathered for post-mortem sessions. At SkyFirst Airlines' new Equity Command Center, monitors tracked global adoption rates of bias prevention policies. One screen blinked: Carrier X public apology issued. Carrier Y bias training 2-hour pilot complete. The impetus was clear: inertia was no longer an option for any service provider. Finally, at Meridian's corporate headquarters in Chicago, David Chen Williams stood on the 47th floor balcony watching planes bank against the sunset. The city's lights mirrored the constellations above, and he reflected on the improbable chain reaction his son had set in motion. What began with a teenager's calm assertion of dignity had rewritten the rulebook for an entire industry and beyond. The world had woken up to the fact that discrimination could no longer hide in routine procedures or silent assumptions. Instead, it would be met with real-time accountability, empowered by cameras, live streams, regulators, and most importantly, by the unwavering resolve of every person who demands respect. In those final moments of daylight, it was clear the ripples from that singular act of courage had become a tsunami of change sweeping through boardrooms, airports, halls of power, and living rooms alike. And the sky, once the domain of unchecked authority, had become the stage for a new global mandate. Dignity, once demanded, could never be grounded again. The terminal lights glimmered like constellations overhead as Marcus Wellington settled into the captain's conference room one last time. It had been 2 years since Flight 447's first-class flashpoint, the viral moment that sparked the Wellington Protocol and rewrote aviation's rulebook on dignity. Now, as he scanned the live dashboard behind him, the data told a story even more dramatic than that tense pre-flight standoff. Discrimination complaints across major airlines had plunged by 70%. Quarterly reports, once peppered with angry missives and voucher requests, now showcased unprecedented harmony. Passengers from every background boarding, deplaning, and flying on schedules unmarred by microaggressions or profiling. Where once cabin crews tiptoed around tense confrontations, they now offered the same warm greetings to a teenager traveling solo as to a seasoned executive in a bespoke suit. The industry's transformation was real, measurable, and irreversible. Marcus closed his laptop and turned to the half-dozen executives seated around the oval table airline CEOs who had flown in from across the globe at his invitation. Their faces carried a mix of relief and resolve. Behind them, a screen cycled through images of terminals bright with dignity standards posters, flight attendants wearing subtle "I stand for respect" pins, and real-time feedback kiosks buzzing with positive passenger notes. "Let's begin," Marcus said quietly. 2 years ago, this office saw footage that none of us could unsee. We watched as assumptions and prejudice grounded a flight in mid-air. We could have let that moment fade into outrage. Instead, we chose action. He paused, letting the weight of those decisions settle in the room. Today, that choice has rippled far beyond a single carrier. We've collectively proven that dismantling injustice in aviation takes more than apologies. It takes power, a plan, and the courage to follow through. The airline heads nodded. A soft chime announced incoming data, real-time metrics from dozens of airports. Marcus gestured, and the chart expanded to show a steady decline in discrimination reports, crashing from thousands each quarter to mere hundreds. When we launched the real-time reporting system, critics said it would be a PR disaster, he continued. Instead, empowering passengers and frontline staff with transparent channels made discrimination untenable. Cases dropped, and trust climbed. The chief marketing officer of one transcontinental carrier leaned forward. Our customer surveys reflect that. We've seen record-high net promoter scores, especially among travelers who once felt invisible on a plane. They now say, "I belong here." That sentiment drives loyalty in ways we never measured before. Marcus smiled. Yes. And beyond numbers, there's a cultural shift. At Harvard Business School, our story is now required study for crisis management, leadership ethics, and social responsibility courses. Students debate the turning points, analyze the boardroom coup, and draw lessons on how one person's dignity can spark systemic change. He clicked his remote. The screen shifted to a classroom at Stanford where MBA students watched a reenactment of the Flight 447 incident, pausing to discuss key decisions: Sarah Mitchell's gulf of error, Tom Jenkins's misstep, and the simple power of a polished business card. Across continents, Marcus said business leaders now ask, what if we responded with grace rather than retaliation? That question didn't exist before. The CFO of a Middle Eastern airline raised a hand. Our own preliminary data shows we're on track to echo those 70% reductions. But what about sustainability? How do we ensure this legacy endures when market pressures push back against the time and cost of ongoing training? Marcus nodded. By embedding accountability into every role and process. Executive bonuses are now partly tied to measurable respect scores. Crew performance reviews include randomness audit results. And we've spread the Dignity in Transit Act modeled on the U.S. law to regulators in Europe, Asia, and Africa. When compliance becomes a legal requirement, culture inevitably follows. He watched as the executives scribbled notes. Then he leaned back. But most important, we empower ordinary travelers. The Dignity and Travel Foundation, now active in 23 countries, has logged over 50,000 incident reports. Those reports fuel quarterly audits, refine training modules, and ensure no single story of injustice is ever buried. A former skeptic, the head of a budget carrier, cleared his throat. I'll admit I thought real-time reporting would overwhelm our staff. Instead, we've seen early interventions that prevent escalation. A gate agent can now discreetly reroute a crew member for a courtesy check before another awkward confrontation. The system flags microaggressions before they become viral crises. Marcus allowed himself a private moment of pride, as he often did, recognizing that these ripple effects had reached far beyond his initial demand for respect. From hotels to ride-share service industries adopted the same protocols. The ripple had become a wave washing across sectors with the unspoken message, "Dignity isn't optional, it's the standard." He clicked once more. The screen now displayed a montage of frontline staff, diverse faces, leaning in, offering water-adjusting headsets, greeting passengers by name. Beneath each frame was a real-time respect score. Flights now close seats to anyone but those who've completed new empathy drills. Passengers sign feedback forms tied directly to crew evaluations. The culture had shifted at 30,000 feet and on every tarmac. Legacy, Marcus concluded, is not built on titles or profits alone. It's forged in moments when power chooses accountability over convenience. My calm response on that flight wasn't some grand gesture, it was simply refusing to accept indignity, and that refusal demanded a plan powerful enough to outlast headlines. As the meeting adjourned, the executives filed out handshake by handshake, some with tears, others with newfound resolve. Outside, the sun dipped below the horizon, igniting the sky in amber flame. Planes glided along runways, each one now carrying the promise that what once felt routine would never again be routine. 2 years on, the world had learned that the cost of dignity is not in dollars or minutes, but in the willingness to stand up quietly, strategically, and say, "I belong." In every cabin, every terminal, every boardroom, that truth endured, dismantling injustice, demands power and a plan. But most of all, the choice to wield both in defense of respect. And with that choice, a single courageous moment can and did reshape an entire industry.